My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9. I had heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It was just one of those things. A little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much about. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me knowing. That's actually how I first figured out about my son's habit. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, rocking slightly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing anything. That was the one part that always got me. For any of you who have lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I'm talking about. His gaze would pass right through me, empty and distant, like he was looking past me into something I couldn't see. It was always extremely strange, and I never fully acclimated to finding him like that. Sometimes he'd mumble something under his breath, words too soft and slurred to understand. Other times, he wouldn't make a sound, just standing there, breathing in that slow, steady way that somehow made it even worse. I'd gently guide him to bed, whispering his name, telling him everything was fine. He never seemed to remember any of it in the morning. Things escalated a few months after I made the realization that he was a sleepwalker. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It sounded like water droplets repeatedly dripping onto a window pane, only it wasn't raining outside. It was soft, barely loud enough to wake me. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, some far-off noise that my half-asleep brain had misinterpreted. But as I lay there, the sound continued, steady and deliberate. It wasn't sporadic like rainfall would be. It occurred at regular intervals, and always at the same volume. I kept listening, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't the wind outside. It was too precise. Once I realized the tapping wasn't going to stop, I begrudgingly accepted that I'd have to deal with it. I sat up and looked towards the door, which is where the sound was coming from. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. I should mention that I wasn't scared, just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. Anyway, I got out of bed to investigate. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw him, my son, facing the wall, his forehead lightly knocking against it in slow, measured taps. His fingertips gently grazed the wall in rhythm with his forehead taps, as if he was trying to walk through it. I remember calling his name, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react, just kept pressing his head forward, knocking it in that eerie rhythmic way, like he was testing something, like he was trying to push through. I stepped closer, but right before I was about to intervene, I hesitated. Something about the way he was moving genuinely sent a chill right through me. I gently reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, shaking him just enough to pull him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked, took a step back, and then, as if nothing had happened, let me lead him back to bed. He never mentioned it in the morning. It happened a few more times, but it was pretty infrequent if I'm being honest. I figured it was just another strange habit of sleepwalkers. Maybe some kind of subconscious response to the wall being there. Some internal sense of space that his dreaming mind hadn't accounted for. And eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped, and the strange, vacant staring in the hallway became a weird little memory that I mostly forgot about. That is, until my younger son started doing the same thing years later. The sleepwalking, I mean. At first, I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Some behaviors repeat themselves. It was just so uncanny that both of them started sleepwalking around the same age. Again though, nothing too unusual. Genetics are a fascinating thing. But eventually, I started noticing the little details. The things that gave me a growing sense of concern. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes open but unfocused. He moved the same way as my older son had, with that slow, eerie rhythm, like his movements weren't completely random. It was unsettling. It felt like I was living the memory of watching my older son do the same thing years earlier. But it got worse than that. One night, I woke up to that tapping noise again. I already knew what I'd see before I stepped into the hallway, and I was right. There he was, forehead pressed to the exact same spot, knocking against the wall like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. It was the exact same behavior my older son had exhibited all those years ago, from the forehead taps all the way down to the way his fingers brushed against the wall. I called his name. Nothing. I touched his shoulder. Nothing. He just kept knocking, his small body swaying slightly, lost in some deep, unreachable place. And that's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk. At least not that I know of. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason for him to exhibit the same exact behavior. Not just the wandering, but the standing, the tapping, the eerie, misplaced urgency of it. I don't know why, but that thought made me feel sick. After some badgering, I eventually snapped him out of his trance. I guided him back to bed and tucked him in like I had done so many times before, trying to tell myself that it was just one of those things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. Just like that, no more sleepwalking, no more tapping. He had no recollection of it either. For years, I didn't think about it. In all honesty, I had forgotten about the whole thing, but there's a reason I'm writing this now. My sons are away at college now, and the house is a lot quieter than what I'm used to. Because of that, my husband and I have to find new things to occupy some of that downtime with. A few weeks ago, we decided to renovate the house. The house is pretty old, and we've lived in it long enough that we've decided to change things up. New floors, new paint, some fresh updates to make the place feel new again. It was all minor work, nothing too intensive. We were stripping the old wallpaper when we noticed something underneath. At first, I thought it was just some old backing or maybe a weird stain, but as we peeled more away, my breath caught. It was an old, antique-style mirror, a mirror that had been covered for some reason. My first thought was, why the hell would someone cover a mirror instead of removing it? I felt ridiculous, standing there staring at a piece of glass like it was going to do something, but I couldn't help but feel like we weren't supposed to find it, like it had been sealed away for a reason. And that's when I realized the mirror was positioned in the exact spot on the wall that my sons had been bumping into all those years ago. The memories came flooding back, and I stood there in shock. There was no logical reason they should have known it was there. They couldn't have, and yet somehow they had. Both of them had independently been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see through the wallpaper. Forget about the fact that they were unconscious. I immediately got rid of that mirror, but I'm still pretty freaked out by the whole thing. There's got to be some kind of rational explanation for this, but I can't think of one. I still don't know what to make of this. I really don't. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. This all started on the week of Halloween, when I would stay after school to help decorate a haunted house for my school's Halloween carnival. I often got to stay and fool around with some of my friends while getting awarded with pizza for helping decorate. Along with my friends, there was also this other kid who would stay late. I'll call him Chris. We had gotten along for the entirety of the time that we would stay after school, and he never once gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely a funny and cool kid. But anyway, fast forward 2 weeks. I was suddenly approached by a group of girls in my grade who were all excited and had wide grins on their faces. I asked them what was going on, only for them to tell me that I had a secret admirer and that he would be texting me tonight. Now, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't excited, or at the very least curious about this. I wanted to know who. Later that night, when I was about to go to sleep, I got a notification from Messenger. It was the only app I had at the time that I always used to communicate with my parents whenever I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten that I added him on Facebook on Halloween. I opened the message and it read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I was concerned and quickly replied, "Yeah, what's going on? Everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't replied. The typing bubbles appeared and stayed there for a good 2 minutes, which meant that he was still typing. It felt like forever until his message finally came through. I didn't expect what came next. In a long paragraph, he confessed his love for me and how I've been driving him crazy since Halloween. He also proceeded to explain how he tried to impress me during recess and phys ed with his soccer skills, but that I never seemed to notice him. He said that he was growing tired of being ignored, and it ended with, "I want you to notice me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I stared at the message for a long time. What the hell, I barely even know this kid, and I drifted apart from him a long time ago. I was trying to come up with a way to let him down easily, as I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him like that, and that I wanted to just be friends. I could tell right away that he didn't like this answer. He kept asking me why, and I had to come up with a reason each time until he eventually stopped answering. The next morning was a nightmare for me. Some of his friends kept coming up to me and telling me that Chris wanted to kiss me, which he told the entire grade he wanted to do, and that he would do it even if it meant cornering me. Taking this as a threat, I decided to tell my teacher. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he ever got even close to me, to run right back to the classroom. This wasn't enough for me. I reported him to the principal, who told me he would do something right away, and this gave me some relief. I feel I should mention that I lived right across the street from my school, and everyone knew this, including Chris, which leads me to what happened next. Later on in the week, I was walking home from school. I hadn't even been inside my house for more than 2 minutes before I heard someone knocking on my front door. I peeked out the window just in time to see someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have been following me. My mom opened the door to find a piece of paper on the floor, and not surprisingly, it was addressed to me. I read the note out loud, and it said there was a surprise waiting for me under the Cadillac in my driveway, which at the time belonged to my brother. My mom went to check, only to find nothing. But it was after this day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. I still have no idea what Chris did to the car, but my brother was forced to sell it. Unfortunately, my nightmare doesn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, telling me to give him a chance and that he would treat me right. There was even a moment when I caught Chris taking a picture of me walking home, and the only reason I saw him was because I barely heard the sound of an iPhone camera behind me. Who knows how many photos of me he had on his phone. And every morning I woke up to a message from him with something along the lines of, "I can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The harassment and stalking were only getting worse, and it was making me fear for my safety, especially now that he knew where I lived. Finally, I got a call into the counselor's office and I felt relieved, expecting her to tell me that Chris was going to get in trouble or that the cops would get involved. Anything. Instead, what I heard was worse. The counselor proceeded to tell me that boys will be boys, that they do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about this. She told me I should feel flattered as this kind of stuff was bound to happen, and that the only thing I could do was to accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't see the problem with her words, as I genuinely believed her, but looking back on it now, this was an insane and disturbing thing to say to a 6th grader who was being sexually harassed and who was fearing for her safety almost every day. That afternoon, I came home from school telling my mom everything the counselor told me, and she was rightfully furious. I was called to the principal's office again that same week, this time with my mom present. I remember very clearly my mom telling the counselor and principal, "What are you waiting for something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She continued to ask why it was taking so long for something to be done. They both stayed silent. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor and telling her to never speak to me again unless she was present. But unfortunately, I don't think the school ever did punish Chris, which to this day enrages me. He basically got away with everything. It doesn't even end there. One night during the weekend, when my parents had gone shopping, I was about to go to bed after watching a YouTube video on my iPad, when I heard something at my window. Now, I'm on the 2nd floor, so this was especially strange. The only thing that hits my window are birds accidentally flying into it. I sat up listening. Then it happened again. It sounded as if someone had thrown something at the glass. Then it happened again and again. They were consistent thuds, and it was starting to freak me out. I finally got the courage to get up from my bed and see what it was. My heart dropped into my stomach when I opened the curtain and looked down, to see Chris holding a handful of rocks, looking up at my window. He somehow had managed to figure out which window was mine. He was about to throw another when he noticed me. I could ever so slightly see that he was saying something, but I didn't stop to see what. I remember going to see if every window and door was locked, and thankfully everything was. When I returned to my room, I received 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave? I just want to talk. I'm sorry, all I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me. You are not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, even though I had to see him throughout the entirety of my school years, from 6th grade to senior year. The last thing I heard about him was that he was arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest and scariest part of my story, though, is the fact that a counselor was comfortable with telling me that this kind of behavior was a compliment and a learning experience for me as a girl. I just hope that woman no longer works with children and that I never have to see Chris again.
I'd consider myself a pretty laid-back guy. I'd say the same about most of my friends. This happened last year, so I'll get right into it. Spring break was supposed to be just me and my friends Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel camping on a secluded beach in Alabama. No crowds, just stars and waves. We got there late, later than we planned. We parked in the closest lot and began walking toward the beach. The place was dead quiet. No other campers, no fishermen, nothing but empty sand stretching for miles. According to Isabel, who was familiar with the area, locals sometimes use that part of the beach for overnight fishing, but that night it was empty. It wasn't fully dark out yet, but the sun had started setting, so we'd need to set up camp quickly. Jackson and I began pitching the tents. Since I had driven, I had brought my dog Bean with me. He was a Doberman who loved the sand, so we all got a kick out of watching him run and roll around. At one point, Ariel pointed out a car in the distance, saying it had driven by twice already. I turned. An old, beat-up-looking SUV slowly rolled past on the narrow access road that ran parallel to the dunes. The access road was a little more than a strip of packed sand, just wide enough for one car. On one side was the beach where we were, and the other side was a line of shrubs. You couldn't really see the main roads from where we were. The car drove by and ultimately disappeared down the road. The 4 of us shrugged it off and went back to setting up, and by the time we finished, we decided to crack a few beers and chop it up in a circle. The girls drank seltzers instead of beer, which we made fun of them for. It was almost fully dark at that point. I can't remember who noticed it first, but that car that had driven by was back again. Only this time, it stopped when it was parallel to us. The driver's door opened and a man got out. I could tell it was a man because he was really tall, although I couldn't make out any features of his face. He began walking towards us, and the girls got nervous. Jackson and I told them not to worry, and we got up to go intercept the man before he could reach our campsite. Bean was already on high alert, so I told him to come with us. As we got closer, I started to notice that he was walking oddly. There was this slight limp in his walk, and he almost stumbled a few times. When we got close enough, Jackson said, "How's it going, man?" trying to keep things light. The guy didn't waste any time. He immediately said, "You're on my property." He slurred his words a bit, and I figured he was a little drunk. I told him we thought the beach was public land. Keep in mind, it was really unlikely that some dude owned the beach. There were no private signs anyway. After I said that, the guy didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a knife. Bean started growling in response to the man's body language, which honestly should have scared the guy off given how scary Dobermans look. But he didn't budge. Instead, he started running towards us with his knife outstretched. Bean charged at him and jumped to attack his arm that was holding the knife, causing him to fall to the ground. I yelled no at the top of my lungs as I didn't want my dog to get stabbed, but Bean somehow got the dude to drop the knife. The man screamed in pain as Bean bit his arm. I whistled for him to get off, and he listened to me. He ran back to my side, but kept his eyes on the guy who was now writhing in pain on the ground. Eventually, the guy got up and started running back towards his car. Jackson and I ran back to the girls, telling them everything. By the time we finished, that SUV had driven off. The girls wanted to pack up and carry everything back to the car, but there was a part of me that was nervous about that plan. That guy was unhinged. There was no telling what he'd do, and I wasn't keen on walking in darkness with my hands full. Isabel made a good point though, saying that he might return with a gun or something. I told Ariel to call the police and tell them where we were and what happened. Once the police were close by, the four of us started walking towards the parking lot with our stuff. Bean was on high alert, and I have to admit the only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of him. I noticed lights up ahead near my car, and I was relieved. The officer stepped out to take our statements, and I was not ready for what happened next. He quickly pointed out my car's tires were slashed, and I was horrified to find out they were. The officer unholstered his weapon and told me to unlock the car, which I did. He opened my trunk, but thank God it was a false alarm. The officer was nice enough to help me with my tire situation. Thank God we brought Bean with us that night. That guy was probably a drunken lunatic. It could have probably been a quadruple murder if he had gotten his way. Finding a nice secluded place to hang out is definitely an awesome time, but it obviously comes with its risks.
It's currently 2024 as I'm writing this. I'm a senior and I'm graduating in a couple weeks. Let me give you all a very brief rant. I never understood how most of my friends could survive a whole week-long spring break trip to Miami or some other party destination. I simply can't. So for every year of college, spring break was an excuse for me to just go home and relax. This past spring break was no different. I'd essentially be going off the grid for a week, taking a break from grueling schoolwork and mindless drama. I was actually really pissed because I had been working on a flawless regrade request for a midterm I'd just taken, and my scummy TA denied it for no good reason. But anyway, it was a Monday morning. I didn't really have any plans, just needed to get a workout in, but that was about it. I've always been a morning workout guy. It's the one thing that makes me feel like I have my life together. So even though I was home for spring break and technically had nothing to do, I still set my alarm for 6 a.m. and forced myself out of bed. I figured if I got to the gym early enough, I could beat the rush. By 6:20, I was already dressed, out the door, and on the road. The drive to the gym takes about 15 minutes, mostly back roads through quiet residential neighborhoods. Nothing ever really happens out there. It was definitely a nice place to grow up in, but a little boring once I got older and all my childhood friends started moving on with their lives. I was driving along listening to some YouTube beats when something strange caught my eye. There was an ice cream truck parked along the curb, just sitting there, engine off, no lights. That wouldn't have been weird in the summer, I guess, but this was mid-March. It was still kind of chilly out. All the kids were still in school too. There was no reason for an ice cream truck to be sitting there at 6:30 in the morning. It looked completely out of place. As I drove past the truck, I slowed down just enough to glance through the driver's window. It was empty. By the time I turned the corner and left it behind, I found myself thinking more about it than I should have. I don't know why. The sight just felt a little bizarre. It wasn't just that it was too early in the year for ice cream trucks. It was that I couldn't remember ever even seeing one in my neighborhood at all. Not even when I was a kid. My area just wasn't that kind of place. As weird as the whole thing was, I quickly dismissed it and proceeded with my workout. After the gym, I got a quick bite to eat and headed home, feeling like I'd actually done something with my morning. But as I turned onto the same street from earlier, the ice cream truck was still there, in the same exact spot. That made me pause. I figured someone would have called it in by now. This is the kind of neighborhood where people are really uptight and get twitchy if you park too long in front of their house. That actually reminds me of a time when some grumpy woman gave my friends and I crap for parking in front of her house, even though we were waiting for our other friend who lived right next door. I say that to say that I'm not crazy for expecting someone to have called the police about the truck. Curiosity got the better of me. Instead of heading straight home, I circled around the block to pass the truck again, just to see if someone was inside it now, and someone was. As I drove past the second time, I must have been a little too obvious with how slowly I was driving, because the guy in the front seat locked eyes with me for a few seconds. He looked really off. He had this long, almost cartoonishly pointed nose and a scraggly beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in years. He genuinely looked like someone who lived in his vehicle, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I drove straight home after that. My parents were both at work, so I had the place to myself. I spent the next few hours just killing time. Sometime in the afternoon, I walked down the driveway to check the mail. As I got to the end of the driveway, I glanced down the street and nearly died inside. It was that same ice cream truck from before. It was parked across the street, about 3 houses down. It wasn't facing me, but I had a feeling it wasn't just a coincidence. I didn't move for a second. I just stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had that guy really followed me home? I knew he had. There was no other explanation. I grabbed the mail and walked straight back inside, trying not to make it obvious that I'd seen anything. Once I was upstairs, though, I went to one of the guest bedrooms. There's a window that overlooks the street from a better angle, so I pulled the curtain aside and peeked through. Sure enough, the ice cream truck was still there. I watched it for a few minutes, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Eventually, I had no choice. I didn't have all day to spend staring out a window, so I tried to get some stuff done on my laptop. I couldn't focus, though. Every half hour or so, I'd feel the urge to go back to the guest room and glance out the window. Every time I looked, the ice cream truck was still visible, but it was in a different spot, which meant the driver was intentionally moving around the street for whatever reason. I didn't know whether it was a good idea to call the police or not. I wasn't sure what I'd even say, given that nothing had actually happened. Even now, I wish that I had just done what any normal person would have done and either called the police or tried to ignore the truck, but I was too curious. My older brother is really into bird watching, so I started digging around his room for a set of binoculars I knew was in there somewhere. Eventually, I found them and returned to the guest room. I pulled the curtains aside and looked at the truck through the binoculars. I was not prepared for what I was about to see. Through the driver's side window, I could see that man from earlier, only he wasn't just sitting there. He was looking back at me with a pair of his own binoculars. As soon as he saw me looking, he instantly dropped the binoculars, started the truck, and drove off. I was horrified. That guy had been spying on me and my house for the better part of 3 hours after literally stalking me home. That's when I finally called the police. I didn't even know what I was expecting from it. I just didn't know what else to do. I told them that this ice cream truck had been circling my neighborhood all day, that I'd seen a man inside watching my house through binoculars, and that he drove off the second I looked back. The dispatcher was calm and told me they'd send someone to patrol the area and keep an eye out. She told me it should be relatively easy to spot an ice cream truck given how distinctive they were. Then she hung up. I didn't know what else to do after that. When my parents got home a little while later, I filled them in. They were obviously concerned, but they also told me it probably wasn't worth worrying about anymore. I was pretty tired by then, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime later, I woke randomly in the middle of the night. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone off my nightstand. It was sometime just after 3 a.m. I sat there in bed, trying to figure out what had woken me up, when I heard it. Music. It was very faint, almost too faint to notice at first. I kept listening, and panic started building inside me when I realized what kind of music it was. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could do anything, something clicked softly against the glass of my bedroom window. I instantly connected the dots. Someone was throwing rocks at my window. That had to be what had woken me up. The music was way too quiet on its own. I sat frozen for a while, staring at the wall across from me. I kept telling myself to look, to just get up and check. But every time I started to move, my body locked up again. Eventually, I forced myself to do it. I crept toward the window and stood to the side of it for a second. On the count of 3, I peeled back the curtain in one fluid motion and looked. The man from earlier was standing in the middle of my front yard, right below my window, and on either side of him, holding his hands, were 2 small children, or at least they looked like children based on how short they were. I really couldn't tell on account of how dark it was. I didn't waste another second. I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest, stepped away from the window, and immediately went to wake up my dad. I had already dialed 911 by the time he went downstairs to have a look around. My dad's a pretty tough guy, so I figured he'd want to handle things himself. Unfortunately, that man had somehow slipped away in the few minutes it took us to get outside. The police arrived a while later. A few days went by and we never heard anything, and I eventually had to go back to school, but my parents promised me they'd be on high alert. That was almost a month ago, and luckily, my parents haven't told me about any strange occurrences since then. The reason I'm writing this now, though, is because my mom called me a few days ago. Apparently, there was a missing persons case that had just gone public in our hometown. 2 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had vanished from a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we lived. The moment she said it, my mind went straight back to that night, to those 2 small figures standing on either side of the man in my front yard. The whole thing honestly makes me sick. Why would that guy sit in my house for hours and throw rocks at my windows in the middle of the night? And why even go to those lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Maybe he was worried that I had somehow caught on to what he was doing, but if he had really taken those kids, wouldn't attention be the last thing he'd want? And then there's the kids themselves. I wonder if they were already with him when I first saw the truck that morning, or were they somewhere else? I really can't stop thinking about it. The only explanation I can come up with is the type of person who'd kidnap a child doesn't think like normal people do, which is why that man would risk getting caught just to freak me out. My mom followed up with the police to try and shed some light on the case and our possible connection to it. If anything ever happens, I will send an update.